Welcome in a day after Georgia absolutely lined up and kicked the you-know-what out of TCU in the national championship game. There's a couple of things I want to talk about with that. Some narratives, some conversation that is happening after the game involving TCU and whether or not they actually belonged in there at all. And Alabama would have given Georgia a better game, and they should have been in over TCU. I'm going to push back on those two things. We're going to talk about that today right here on this video. I'm Michael Borky. Glad that you guys are with me. Don't forget, while you're here, if you like what you hear, hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. I do live streams a couple nights a week, so you can come in and chat with me. So I'm not going to do the has Kirby Smart supplanted Nick Saban Dynasty Georgia conversation today. Don't really want to do that today. We'll do that on a later date. I do think it's so funny, though. There's one narrative out there that is now my favorite that says that Georgia doesn't use the transfer portal because they are just the best at developing talent. And that is cracking me up today. I've seen that in a lot of places. Because number one, it's ignoring the fact that Georgia is using the portal, at least this year they are. And number two, that they have more 4- and 5-star players on their roster than anybody else in college football. So if you gave Kirby and his staff Wake Forest's roster, would they have won the championship last night? So stop. It's much easier to develop 5 stars than the lowly 3 stars, okay? Recruiting rankings do reflect talent. 50% of 5 stars make the NFL, 20% of 4 stars make the NFL, 5% of 3 stars make the NFL. It's a proven thing. It's not perfect, but it's proven. So give me a break on that one. Today, though, we're talking about a couple of things. TCU not belonging, Alabama belonging. Let's break down the TCU part of this, though. Are people forgetting, are we forgetting that TCU beat number 2 Michigan, undefeated Big Ten champion Michigan, who was in the playoff last year, turned around, went undefeated in their last regular season game, absolutely kicked the crap out of Ohio State in Columbus, the same Ohio State team that had a kick to beat Georgia just 2 weeks ago. It's not like the committee just placed TCU in the championship game and that was it. They had to win a semifinal game to get here. And spare me with the refs or because of the pick sixes. Those are team plays that TCU had to make to get there. And blaming the officials on a win and a loss in a semifinal game never resonates with me anyway. I don't think it's a valid argument. TCU beat Michigan to get to this spot. Again, undefeated Michigan who beat Ohio State. So they had to play their way into this. They had to earn their way into the championship. Sometimes you just get your ass kicked, which is what happened to TCU last night. But the benefit of hindsight should not change your reason for why TCU got in. And don't forget, TCU beat Michigan, right? Who smoked Ohio State, dominated Ohio State on the road. And that Ohio State team had a kick to beat Georgia just 2 weeks ago. It's all relative. You can't look at the results in hindsight to determine who should have been in the playoff. TCU earned their way there by beating Michigan. They're just not as good as Georgia. They were also ranked number 3. So do you think that only TCU didn't belong? That Ohio State belonged, even though they didn't win their conference or even win their division, and the last time they played got beat badly by Michigan, but they should have been in and TCU should have been out instead of Alabama. You're only making that argument, if you are, because you have seen the outcome of games as opposed to what a committee had to do to find the 4 teams that were most deserving of those spots before the games actually happened. You can't use the benefit of the hindsight to change the way you think about how the teams were selected. And again, TCU beat Michigan. They weren't just handed this opportunity. They won the game and they earned their opportunity. So let's go to the next layer, though, that TCU didn't belong, that Alabama would have given Georgia a better game than TCU did last night. And maybe so. Maybe Alabama would have. I think, generally speaking, Alabama probably would have beaten TCU had they lined up and played against each other. But you hear that word probably and the phrase, I think. I've seen a lot of that since the game ended, which was really in the first half because Georgia players were literally eating on the sidelines during the game because it was so in doubt. But I don't necessarily disagree with you. But here's some pushback on that because that's subjective. I think they would have, or they probably would have, or they would have been favored. That's all subjective. That's all feelings. And feelings cannot be what we use to determine who belongs in a championship and who belongs in a playoff because our feelings are often wrong. Objective measures have to be the way. I think or thought Alabama was going to beat Tennessee. They gave up 52 points in a loss. I thought that was going to happen. I thought that Alabama was going to win the SEC West. I thought they were going to make the playoff. I thought they were going to be the best team in college football. They weren't. Georgia was. So our thoughts and feelings can't be what decides playoff selection. The games have to matter. Objective measures have to matter because our feelings, our thoughts are not always right. And that's not how things should be determined anyway. Only in college football, at least until next year when the 12-team playoff is implemented. And if you win your conference, you're in. And it's really quite simple. The only way to get in the playoff is to have somebody think that you're the best. Don't think we should operate that way in sports. The NFL doesn't operate that way. The FCS doesn't operate that way. High school football doesn't operate that way. The NCAA tournament, if you win your conference, you're in. It's really quite simple. In college baseball, if you win your conference, you're in. In the NFL, if you win your division, you're in. In the NBA, if you finish in the top 6, you're in. If you finish in the top 10, you have a play-in, and you're in. Only in college football do we have feelings account for the entire field in the playoff. But Alabama, if they wanted to make it, then they simply could have not lost 2 games. Everybody debating whether or not they belonged, blame Alabama for that. Don't blame the committee for that. It's Alabama's fault. They lost 2 games. They gave up 52 points in a loss at Tennessee. They lost to LSU, the same LSU team that lost to Texas A&M and Florida State. And are we completely and totally sure that Alabama would have given us some kind of great game? Some compelling game, or would it have been domination as well? Because Alabama's 2 losses, again, are Tennessee and LSU, right? Do you remember what happened when Georgia played Tennessee? Kind of kicked their ass, right? A monsoon really stopped that score from being much bigger than it was, but Tennessee was dominated by Georgia. And do you remember what happened in the SEC championship? Complete and total domination from Georgia. The 2 teams that beat Alabama got dominated by Georgia. So are we sure that it would have gone much differently last night? Maybe a little bit closer, but are we sure it would have been much because of that? But let's get into some more transitive property stuff because although you can't really apply that in football, and this will be a great illustration of that. So when people say things like TCU could not have gone undefeated with an SEC schedule, maybe not. I actually kind of agree with that, but we don't know for sure. Here's an example. Alabama and TCU have a mutual opponent. Well, 2 of them now, but during the regular season, they had a mutual opponent. It was Texas. Alabama went to Texas and won, but it was close. TCU went to Texas and won by more. So they have that common opponent and in the regular season. Now, Alabama beat the crap out of Kansas State. More on that in a second. But in the regular season, they had a common opponent. And TCU beat Texas by more than Alabama did. And when you say things like, here's the next one, that, well, the Big 12 is a bad conference. It's a terrible conference. And anybody in the SEC would have run through it. LSU would have run through the Big 12. No problem. But yet they lost to Florida State and Texas A&M. Kansas State got smoked by Alabama, right? Absolutely smoked in the Sugar Bowl by Alabama. They beat TCU in the Big 12 championship. That Kansas State team beat the absolute crap out of Missouri, who lost to Georgia by 1 score. So when you talk about how much better the SEC is, then how does Ole Miss get their asses kicked by Texas Tech in a bowl game? That same Texas Tech team that got beat by TCU by 2 scores. We can muddy the waters with those kind of arguments all day long. Again, TCU beat Michigan. Michigan beat Ohio State badly. Ohio State had a kick to beat Georgia. Ohio State was the most competitive team with Georgia this year. So we can dance with this conference is better, this team is better, this team would have gone to that conference and done better stuff all day long. But when you get into the transitive property stuff, all of it is muddy, is the word I'll keep using. Again, Kansas State beat TCU. TCU beat Kansas State. They played twice and they both won. But Kansas State beat the crap out of Missouri, who Georgia barely beat. But Kansas State lost to Alabama badly. It's a mess. So what we have to do is operate in objective measures. That's the only appropriate way to determine who belongs in a playoff. Could TCU have run through Alabama's schedule undefeated? Probably not. I don't think so. But we don't know for sure. And so maybe the 4 best teams in college football didn't make the playoff. Maybe not. You can say that it's clear and you're only, I had somebody tell me last night I was being obtuse for thinking that the committee got it right. I think they did. Because games have to matter. Results have to matter. The less feelings we have in selecting who makes the postseason, the better. It was very simple for Alabama. If they wanted to make the playoff, don't lose 2 games. Maybe your schedule is harder. In fact, I know that their schedule was harder than TCU's. But all you have to do is take care of the teams that you are better than in front of you. That's all you have to do. TCU did it. Alabama was better than Tennessee. Tennessee, a very good team, but Alabama was better. Couldn't beat them. LSU, pretty good team. Alabama should have been better, but they still lost to them anyway. When you take the results out of the equation, you only get feelings. You only get, I think, or probably, or point spreads. And when you do that, you make the games matter less. You make the results matter less. So TCU earned their right to be where they were last night. Could Alabama have given a better game? Maybe. But like I said before, Alabama played Tennessee and lost, and Georgia played Tennessee and beat the crap out of them. Alabama played LSU and lost. Georgia played LSU and beat the crap out of them. So maybe, just maybe, Georgia was a dominating force in college football. And that's really all last night was about. Maybe that's all it was that Georgia was just a wagon, and Georgia won the national championship after they beat Ohio State. But I have seen too many people say things like Alabama is the only team that could have competed with Georgia, as if what happened 2 weeks ago with Ohio State's 2 best wide receivers being out for the entire second half. One didn't play at all. Marvin Harrison gets knocked out early enough in the game, and Ohio State had a kick to win. Are we forgetting that Ohio State lined up and played with Georgia for 4 quarters? But now Alabama is the only team that could have been competitive? That's not sound and logic. That doesn't make any sense, honestly. Last night stunk. It did. It was not fun. It was kind of embarrassing, honestly. I stopped watching after halftime for the most part. Just kind of scrolled around on Twitter. But if you're going to talk about how feelings should dictate results, I promise you, you will soon not like the results. That's all I'm saying. Objective needs to matter. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and I will see you guys on the next one. TCU belonged. Georgia is just college football's new dominating power. See you guys on the next one.